If you are anything like me, when you found out Canada's new food guide was coming out, you were so excited and certainly not indifferent. In fact, you were so excited, you completely forgot to look at it altogether. Well, luckily for you, Canada's cold and I don't want to leave my apartment. Before we figure out what we're definitely supposed to be eating in 2019, let's figure out what we were definitely supposed to be eating in 2007. Oh, 2007. Back when we needed Beyonce to remind us not to get thinking that we were irreplaceable. We may not have been adults then, but we certainly are now. To give a loose summary of the table, clearly the vegans and the hipsters had it right. We can just eat avocado and toast and be immortal. On a more serious note, to get a better visual representation of this, because this chart is absolutely garbage looking, I am going to figure out the percentages of each serving size and make a fancy-dancy pie chart. Now we have our numbers and poof, and here are our pie charts. And what we see is that although the graphs are fairly similar, men have a slightly larger percentage of meat. Thankfully, we have become woke on our diet 12 years later, and in the lit words of Ariana Grande, we say thank you next to 2018, as Canada has blessed us with a new food guide. I can now confidently say, hashtag New Year, New Me. And if you didn't understand what I was saying, just ask one of today's youth, who will surely tell you I was spitting fire. Now let's pop over to the Government of Canada website and discover all of our new food guide resources. Oh wow, look at all those resources. How could I ever be expected to read all of those? Spoiler alert, all those pictures are taken from other files. The Eat Well, Live Well poster has the identical information to the food guide snapshot, and the Eating Healthy recommendations is actually the Appendix A of the 2019 Canada's Dietary Guidelines. That leaves us with 3 documents: the Eat Well, Live Well poster, the 2019 Canada's Dietary Guidelines, and the 2019 Canada's Food Guide for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. First, let's figure out how to eat well and live well. The top half of this document is the fun picture that I've been seeing circulating around Facebook, with everyone asking, "Where's the milk?" And to that I say, make water your drink of choice. That's right. If you are a healthy boy, those milkshakes will not bring you to the yard. Having 4 food groups was way too stressful anyways. Now we only have to concern ourselves with the following: have plenty of vegetables and fruits, eat protein foods, and choose whole grain foods. And since we aren't given a number of servings, it sure is handy that all this food was organized into a fancy-dancy pie chart. And since we have our 2007 chart, we can throw that up next to our 2019 chart, and poof, we have our comparison. So what we see is that milk has been completely blown off the map and has essentially been absorbed by our vegetables and fruits. Then our grains take an 11-point loss, only to be picked up by the meat. If you thought that was all you needed to know, then you are a fool, because eating healthy is more than just the foods you eat. First, you need to be mindful of your eating habits. But you're already listening to me talk, so you pretty much nailed it. Next, you need to cook more often. Well, actually, you just need more home-cooked food, which really just means cook more. Additionally, I already cook several pounds of meat a week. How much meat do I need to cook in a week? Next, you need to enjoy your food. Unless it's bad, don't enjoy bad food. And if it's good and you don't enjoy it, well, you should probably eat it anyways. Actually, there's no connection between joy and healthy food. If you are unable to do any of the other steps, Just make sure you eat meals with others. That is, of course, if they eat healthy meals. If they don't, you need better friends. In order to complete any of the previous steps, of course you need to buy food. And which food do you buy? Of course, you figure that out by reading the label. And how do you use the label? Well, apparently that's a secret that we're not allowed to know. But what we do know is we need to limit foods that are high in sodium, sugars, and saturated fats. By how much? Oh, we have another mystery. Finally, be aware of food marketing. By the way, now that I've just told you, you are definitely aware. As a special side note, if you or anyone you know finds ads on your laptop and chooses to take a picture of them with your cell phone, you have much bigger issues than your food. Now that we know how to eat well and live well, we can actually transition over to the 2019 Dietary Guidelines. If your first question was, what are these guidelines? You are in luck. And if we look at the first section here, the objective of the guidelines are to promote healthy eating and overall nutritional well-being, and support improvements to the Canadian food environment. And if you're anything like me, your first thought is, what the hell is a food environment? Luckily, the Canadian Food Guide has us covered. All right, so a food environment covers the aspects of the social and physical environment that affects the types of food available, the accessibility of food, the nutrition information that people are exposed to, including food marketing. All these aspects of the food environment can influence food choices. Thankfully, I needed more vegetables today, so that word salad was perfect. That can be more clearly summarized as what you eat and why you eat it. Jumping back, we now know the point of this guide is to tell you what is healthy and make sure you eat it. If this has already been too much for you, the healthy eating recommendations in Appendix A translate Canada's dietary guidelines into simple, relevant, and evidence-informed messages. Oh look, and what do we have here? Appendix A. Let's have a look at some of these suggestions. Be mindful of your eating habits. Take time to eat. Notice when you are hungry and when you are full. Since eating, like everything, requires time, I'm actually more impressed with the people who don't take time to eat. And let's not ignore the people who run around completely unaware of their hunger. Are you hungry? Are you full? Who knows, you wild animals? Most of the other points here have been covered on the Eat Well, Live Well poster, so we can quickly go through and see cook more often, enjoy your food, eat meals with others, eat plenty of vegetables and fruit, whole grain foods and protein foods, choose protein food that comes from plants more often. Limit highly processed foods. If you choose these foods, eat them less often and in small amounts. Make water your drink of choice. Use food labels. Be aware that food marketing can influence your choices. If you have been paying attention at all, you'll remember that this guide is designed to improve the food environment, which includes food marketing, which you are now told to be aware of. That's right, be aware of this guide. This may sound outrageous, but despite all of the material covered, we have not actually covered any of the guidelines. So let's jump into those now. We can see here that Guideline 1 is that nutritious foods are the foundation for healthy eating. Since most of these points were covered in the Eat Well, Live Well poster and Appendix A, I'm going to go a little rapid fire and explain what is going on. I would just ask that you keep in mind that you are currently reading a food guide. That might seem like a silly thing to remind you of, but obviously no one reminded the person writing this. Nutritious foods to consume regularly can be fresh, frozen, canned, or dried. Yes, those are all the ways food can be presented. This is an absolutely meaningless statement. Nutritious foods can reflect cultural preferences and food traditions. Or they cannot. That's right, there is no connection between nutrition and culture. Thank you for another meaningless statement. Eating with others can bring enjoyment to healthy eating and can foster connections between generations and cultures. Fostering connections between generations and cultures? Weird, that doesn't sound like diet advice. Traditional food improves diet quality among indigenous peoples. That is excellent advice. I actually have nothing to complain about. In fact, I can't wait to bring this up when we go through the Native Dietary Guide. Energy needs are individual and depend on a number of factors, including levels of physical activity. That sounds an awful lot like it's suggesting food needs are individual and that a universal guide cannot be implemented. Interesting. Some fad diets can be restrictive and pose nutritional risks. Yes, and some won't be. Thank you for giving me no information at all. Food choices can have an impact on the environment. This is real advice in a food guide. Thankfully, Guideline 2 actually takes a side on something and doesn't just say completely neutral, meaningless statements. Let's see what we have here. Processed or prepared foods and beverages that contribute to excess sodium, free sugars, or saturated fat undermine healthy eating and should not be consumed regularly. Excellent. So in summary, excess sodium, free sugars, or saturated fats, bad. Sugary drinks and confectionaries should not be consumed regularly. Sugar substitutes do not need to be consumed to reduce the intake of free sugars. That's right, sugar bad. Foods and beverages offered in publicly funded institutions should align with Canada's Dietary Guidelines. That's right, food guide good. There are health risks associated with alcohol consumption. I think you know what that means. Alcohol bad. Wow, Canada Food Guide, this is fantastic. Maybe I've been wrong about you the whole time. Now, let's continue on to Guideline 3. I am actually not going to highlight anything on this slide. Why, you ask? Because the Canada Food Guide is suggesting you learn to cook, which isn't bad advice, but with the emphasis on learning to cook, perhaps they could make any suggestions at all, anything other than, hey you, learn to cook. And with those 3 guidelines, you have now mastered the Canada Food Guide. Now let us summarize all of the food advice we've received. In first place, we clearly have vegetables. In second place, we have our proteins and our grains. In third place, we have, well, this is awkward. Now let's get our graph back up there so we know how much to eat. Poof. Of course, we were also told what we couldn't eat, so we have our hall of shame with sugar and alcohol. Now that we know what we can eat, Let's figure out how we can do that with some advice. Number 1, learn how to cook. Number 2, learn how to read labels. Congratulations! You are now a master of the Canada Food Guide. If you're now wondering, hey, what about the natives? Don't worry, we already got their advice. They need to eat more traditional foods like bread, bannock, cold cereal, hot cereal, cooked pasta, milk, powdered milk mixed, fortified soy beverage, canned milk evaporated, yogurt, cheese. If you're thinking, hey, that's not fair of you to just shoehorn the natives in at the last second, I would like to say, hey, I'm just following the model of the Canada Food Guide. Because those servings look awfully familiar. Poof. While the graphs aren't identical, it's actually more impressive than you realize. Because while eating traditional food, natives should in fact eat a lower percentage of meat and a higher percentage of grain products and vegetables. Additionally, natives are still required to have many of their traditional milk products. With this food guide, I feel like Canada is already healthier. And the only thing left to say is, oh Canada!